Fungus.
Atkins.
Chocolate chip.
Bomb.
The circus.
It's very rare I'm hyped enough to watch a show as it comes out each week, but I've done a lot of scene analyses on this channel. I did a video about the best line from Glass Onion, so I thought, why not do the best scene from The Last of Us each episode? So you've got episodes 1 and 2 rolled into the same video here because I only thought of this morning. And if this video does well, I'll do the same thing again each episode every week as a whole series. So yeah, if you want that, please give this video a like and maybe a bit of engagement to give it its best shot of doing well. I've still got other videos I'm working on in the meantime too, so don't worry about that, but anyway, the best scene from episode 1 is obviously the opening scene, in which John Hannah here said, no it's not. In my books it's not the best scene, it's a masterful scene that takes what could be your typical lazy scientist gives a lecture to establish plot points type of exposition, and instead turns it into a super tense scene which sets up all of the rhythm to expect from this entire episode. The gradual transition from light-hearted peace to ever-growing dread and danger. And I'd even say increasing darkness as the shadow of guests make the scene darker as it goes along, I think just about. More close-ups and an eventual sharp cuts to black. Everything in this episode is going on a decline towards danger. We get Sarah waking up bright and early for a happy day, only for everything to get progressively darker, louder, faster, to finish up out in a dark field with only this single light before rolling down a hill further away from the lights and death. And then we get a sunny morning with Joel slowly transitioning into faster, more dangerous, darker scenes, again ending with death. Loosely, at least. I think you can pick holes in that argument. But that was a tangent anyway. The point is, the first scene of this show is really great. Yes, I can see why people talk about it as the best scene. It not just sets out important exposition, but sets the tone perfectly, I think. And what a perfect switch to have two scientists discussing future threats to humanity. The first scientist discussing a global virus, the sort of thing we are all horribly familiar with nowadays, and know just how awful that can be, only for the second scientist to sweep that threat aside and say, no, that's nothing at all. I have a much bigger danger to introduce you to. Plus, I think it parallels this cordyceps outbreak happening slap bang in the middle of the SARS outbreak of 2003, again kind of brushing aside the real world virus to bring in a more terrifying fictional danger. I think the comparison between the two makes it even more powerful. But enough of that, what do I think then is the best scene in episode 1 and why? I should have got to this sooner. Let's discuss that, let's break it down in detail. Your final chance is now to guess what my favourite scene is as I run my channel intro. After everything that happens with Sarah on the day of the outbreak, we cut to 20 years in the future and begin again with this little narrative of a kid wandering to a quarantine zone, being tested for the infection, and then when he tests positive, cutting to him being dumped in a fire by a very different kind of Joel now. It's about 4 minutes in length, it's heartbreaking, it's concise, and it does so much heavy lifting in terms of setting up this world, plus some really effective symbolism. First, I'm going to say again though that we move from a very peaceful, bright, sunny setting, moving geographically downwards, down to what should be a safe haven, but instead moves into shadow, into relative darkness. This is not a safe haven, not for the infected, even if you are a child. But yeah, through this peaceful forest we see this boy staggering, and if you've played the game, I reckon your immediate thought that this is Ellie. I think there's an intentional parallel between them, which we'll get to in a moment, but we see very simply how overgrown the world has become, the sort of situation a child might find themselves in. We see the bombed out city of Boston and this very large wall guarded by armed soldiers with the wonderfully ironic sign reading welcome. And this is just a few shots without dialogue. It perfectly establishes what has happened to this world in the last 20 years. We don't need to be told how the infection spread or even what the infection is yet. That would be over-explaining, I think, at this point in the story. It would kill the pace and the intrigue. Here we see exactly what we need to know. The world has been bombed and destroyed. Certain areas are guarded as safe zones and controlled by an armed force. chaos. The boy collapses and the soldiers run to him, where the opening of the gates is signified through this traffic light turning straight from red to green, which is also important, but we'll come to that as well. This blurred shot of the boy being led in strapped to a wheelchair, fiddling with what I think is a police or a Fedra badge. If it is, there's a horrible irony in a boy holding this badge of what I guess you can say justice, whilst his wrists are bound together. Anyway, the camera remains solely on his face and his subdued yet anxious expression. It's quite powerful, that, until he looks up at this sign, which again is telling us a lot of what we need to know about the infection. In just quick visual shots, we are learning so much here. Then this soldier takes off her helmet, bringing some humanity back to these ominous soldiers all dressed in black that we already don't think the best of. She is kind and reassuring, but it's also notable that she doesn't really care if the boy answers her questions or not. Nothing he says would really affect anything. The one time he looks like he's going to speak, she cuts him off.
It's gonna be a little tickle.
All that really matters is his reading on this scanner. What does his test show? Is he infected or not? The traffic lights turning from red to green, now reversed with this bright red light. And in fact, I couldn't help having seen this, watching the show, and thinking there are a lot of contrast between red and green. Which would be a great touch if it's true, but it also might be me reaching a bit too far, I'm not sure. You know, having seen the imagery in this moment, perhaps I'm just seeking it out in every other moment. But the sharp absolute split between infected and not infected is a clear dividing line in this world. A line that cuts through all morality. It doesn't matter who you are, what your situation is, anything. If you're infected, you're the enemy to kill. That's it. Except until Ellie. She blurs this line between red and green. Because really, as this scene is setting up for later, her reading will also be red, and yet she is not an enemy to kill. She is not sick. She is, in fact, humanity's best hope of a cure. So I might be reaching a bit there, but in that context, a contrast throughout the show of reds and green would make a lot of sense in terms of how it reflects the ways people see each other here. How they've had to switch off all morality and reduce everything down to seeing people either as reds or green. But we are going to pause for a quick moment now so I can tell you about World Anvil. Yes. Hello world! Have you heard of World Anvil? World? Sponsoring this video. World Anvil is an online tool for world building, character creation, campaign building and playing in all of these games. Planning and writing your stories and possibly some other stuff. I just use it for my novel, but it does other stuff too. World building can be difficult, you know. I used to use a folder for different Word documents which seemed simple enough to begin with until things get complex and you end up with a disorganized mess and you suddenly wish you had hyperlinks to different characters or mythologies in your notes. Or imagine this, say you want to design your own calendar for your world. You can pop in all the information, have the calendar generated, then build a timeline of historical events linked to that calendar or several calendars with all sorts of hyperlinks you might want sprawling to other articles, and then upload a map and link different events to locations on the map so you can easily see where and when everything happened. I find that so handy. And if the timeline affects how the map looks, such as a big city getting destroyed or whatever else, you can add altered maps to reflect those changes. And there are other tools as well. This is just the one I find most exciting, especially when it is all surprisingly easy to set up. In all my use of World Anvil so far, I haven't ever bothered to watch any of their tutorials on how to do stuff. I've just got on with it. I have a link in the description and as a pinned comment with the code TREE, which offers you 40% off all their subscriptions. There are different levels and you can even try out the free version initially, so give it a whirl, take it for a test drive. World Anvil. Now me back to talking other things. Anyway, yeah, that out of the way, this scene is heartbreaking. It establishes the world and the infection, but also tells us a lot about Fedra. Having just gone from a scene in which a soldier shoots a child, we now find the military 20 years on has somewhat become desensitized to the idea of this. It's now a standard protocol that they've all come to accept. We can speak kindly and offer reassurance and a more humane method of execution, but the stark reality remains the same. And I think the truth of that, I think of seeing it so hard-hittingly in this child's fate, is brutal. this is the kind of world they're in now. And on the other hand, while we perfectly understand them doing this, it's hard to imagine what else they could do. It does still somewhat frame Fedra as the villains right now, which is, I think, incredibly interesting in terms of how it contrasts with the Fireflies later in this episode. Introducing Fedra as brutal allows the Fireflies to appear as a hope for something different, not a dictatorship, and interestingly, in terms of what we learn of Marlene and Ellie, people who might not just kill a child that's infected. I mean, no, it's not Firefly protocol that they chain children to radiators and test them for days, but it still establishes a difference between the two camps. The armed forces swooped in as the emergency response to a terrible danger. In 20 years that have passed, has anything improved since then? Has Fedra achieved or changed much? Questions this scene might bring up for the show to later explore. And Joel, when we last saw him, he was crying over the death of a child. Now we are reintroduced to him throwing one into a fire with total numbness in his body language. Pedro Pascal acts this moment brilliantly. In one shot, one parallel to Sarah, it tells us absolutely everything we need to know about his character. And more so the hard cut from the soldier saying,
"You're safe,"
to this blazing fire is just brutal. I also really like after this body is thrown in, the camera slowly pans up towards the sky, towards, the sun, peace, hope, heaven, whatever it is. But before the camera can even pan an inch above the wall of the quarantine zone, we again cut to the ashes being shoveled into a bin. It's so brutal. Something the game can't do easily is step away from the playable characters to use the perspective of someone else as a way to very effectively and concisely introduce us to so many elements of the world, leading us right from the edge of the quarantine zone all the way through to Joel, all of it leaving us painfully aware of how this situation parallels Ellie. What happens to this boy? How easily the same thing could have happened to her? Humanity's hope for the future could have been thrown into a fire on the basis of one red light. Who's to say this boy, any other body they've burned today, wasn't also immune to the disease? So yeah, I think this is the best scene in the first episode of the show, all done with very little dialogue at all. Well done me. Now, why don't we discuss episode 2? So firstly, honourable mentions. Ellie waking up in this light with a butterfly, which has already been used in the show as a symbol. This sense of hope set against Tess and Joel looking on from the dark as skeptics. Great scene. Being so used to the game, it's easy to forget how great an idea it is for this child Ellie to have this power of immunity. It's not like the classic hero with some great superpower type ability or anything that makes her strong. She's literally still just a vulnerable child. Nor is she invincible. She's just been marked with the potential for something, a potential all others will look on with desperation or skepticism. Of course, it's a child that would be the symbolic hope for the future here, the importance and the danger emphasised further when the only other two children we've seen in this show both died. And in Joel saying,
"You need to stop talking about this kid like she's got some kind of life in front of her."
That's one of the great difficulties of this situation. It becomes so impossible to envision or even dare to believe in the future when the present occupies an endless amount of your headspace. The other honourable mention, the whole clicker sequence, which I did consider talking about, but it's a very long sequence, so it doesn't feel fair to talk about it as one scene. And anyway, most of what I want to say about it is the pacing of this episode that builds up to make the suspense of this scene so effective. At first, I thought it was a shame to breeze through this skyscraper location, remembering what that scene is like in the game, but it means the episode begins with proper emphasis on character. It means we start with this tense stillness and quiet that builds uncertainty. We get time to familiarise ourselves properly with the threat now. They talk a little about the infected, the rumours of spores, how long they survive for. Then we see them at a long distance and are told about the hive mind. Then we reach this ominous door, they find a body and Ellie reveals this is not like the infected she met before. This is not what they would do, this is something more. And that uncertainty about the something more, that's what makes this sequence click, if you can excuse the pun. They don't explain what that something more is. Tess hopes it's not the case. Joel simply stresses the need for silence. We can feel their fear now. Then they sneak on until slowly noises do alert the clickers. We first hear them, and then we see them, and All of that build-up, all throughout the episode, even including the Jakarta scenes, all of that means what we get here is just so suspenseful. I think the best scene though is probably the obvious choice this time round. Tess's death scene. It's great, I think, because it doesn't do the typical things I'm used to seeing happen in these sort of situations. One, I feel like after Tess got bit, a lot of shows would have shown her to you subtly looking at her wound, revealing it to the audience, creating tension out of the idea that we now know she's infected, but Joel and Ellie don't know. I think instead though we get more tension through the uncertainty that just these little hints. We don't know for certain, we're just seeing this slight change in her behaviour and wondering what's affecting her here. Has she been bitten? We get to figure it out for ourselves without quite knowing for certain until it's confirmed by Ellie at the right moment, and I very much like that. The second thing, how the camera stays with Tess for her final moments. A lot of shows would have probably made it more heroic by not showing that final moment, or showing her charge, or make some last quip or final words, as she then puts a lighter to the floor or pulls a pin in a grenade, all badass before cutting away to the explosion. Not to say Tess isn't heroic in this scene, because she absolutely is, but it's to say that it's still very human, I think. We get to see her terror. The best thing of all, I think, is that we get to see her give up, almost. It's not just her struggling with the lighter to create tension and getting it to work at the last moment, there's also despair in her expression. As the infected approaches, she kind of stops. She gives up. She thinks she's failed. That moment of giving up is so damn powerful here. I've heard a lot of people don't like the kiss of death idea, and I understand that. I think it's different to the game. Some people think it's there just for a gross out moment. I personally like how it makes the infected still seem like there's something vaguely human in there. Something horribly intimate about this. Even before the kiss, the way it stops and calmly approaches instead of all of them just charging aimlessly about. It increases Tess's despair, I think, to see something not just beast-like here. Due to the slowness of the approach, we get to see more of how she hesitates and is just mostly frozen on the spot, and I really like it. I love Anna Torv's acting and all of this. I love her saying that in taking Ellie to the Fireflies, Joel can
set everything right. All the shit we did.
because it just adds the loose idea of redemption into the mix, again highlighting that Tess and Joel are not heroes. And I love the line as well,
Save who you can save.
because Tess is saying Joel can't save her, but it also echoes the idea of Sarah and once again strengthens that parallel between her and Ellie. And of course I love the swiftness with which Joel turns and does not look back. Ellie and the camera linger on Tess's death. The episode ends leaving us to linger on that fact, but Joel instead presses on. Joel cannot afford to reflect on it. Anyway, I know I've said relatively little about this scene in comparison, but that doesn't make it any less great. So far this show has been an absolute blast, and I really hope it can continue on the same level. But please comment. Do you agree with me? Did I miss something or get something wrong? What was your favourite scene, you know? And if you liked the video, if you want more of these for future episodes, please give this a like, maybe even subscribe. I've still got other content on the way too, and there's even my Patreon page for even more stuff there. Thank you again to Wild Anvil, of course, but otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Janice McMahon, Luke Core, Treachu Kaber, Michael Gallagher, In Squares, Flying Spider, Samara Salsi, Joshua C. Follier, and Chad Bramwell. Thank you.